Welcome to the Happy Century Corner in Special Education podcast. We are here to ask leaders in special education to share their insights, experiences, to better understand how to support students in special education. And the focus at the moment with this episode is going to be on reducing the use of restraints. Before we start our interview, I'd like to introduce our guests. And our first guest is Dr. Carrie Potter-Murray, who is the Education Director at the Holy Family Institute in Pittsburgh. Welcome to the podcast, and thank you for being on the show, Carrie.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And we are here also with Claudie Pomares, the creator of sensory enrichment therapy, which is an evidence-based brain stimulation program to improve the behavior regulation and learning abilities of all students, but especially those who struggle the most. And Claudie will be doing a short training on a sensory enrichment protocol at the end of our interview, so stick around. And as for me, I am Kim Pomares, CEO of Mendability. Christine, our host for the podcast, was not available for this episode. And for those of you who are paying attention, yes, I have the same family name as Claudie, and that's because she is my mom.
Oh, how nice.
We should do an episode on how Mendability got started way before my time and how you wrote me into this, Claudie.
Yeah, they need to know.
So, Carrie, we like to start with the why. And so, could you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to get into special ed?
Sure. It's a little bit of a story, but my undergraduate degree and my beginnings in my career were not in education or specifically special education. I actually was a writer. My undergrad degree is in journalism. And when I was an undergrad, I worked for a nonprofit organization that used investigative reporting to exonerate individuals who had been wrongfully convicted. And so I had been conditioned, if you will, that my career and my calling was always going to serve a social justice aspect. And so shortly after I graduated, I didn't feel that pull, that I didn't feel that fulfillment, I suppose, in the writing work that I was doing. I didn't feel like I was serving a greater cause. And so on a whim, I fell into a TSS position, which you probably know is a therapeutic staff support role, which is part of a wraparound model. So there I worked with children who have autism, who are nonverbal. And I worked with my clients and their families in homes, schools, and communities. And I loved it so much that I stuck with that for quite a bit. And one day I went with one of my clients who was participating in her kindergarten screenings. And I was asked to wait in the school's lobby, their front office, while my client tested. And I sat next to an older woman who was talking to me about special education and, my thoughts on it. And I actually had a lot to share because my brother has autism, and his name is Ben. And my mom and dad and I had been, we all played a role in raising Ben and making sure that Ben had the correct supports and services that
Mm.
that he deserved. But more on that in a moment. But I had no idea who this woman was, other than she was very nice and her name was Barb. But she called my client's house later in the day and asked to speak to me and reintroduced herself as the special education director of my client's school district and asked if I was interested in a teaching job. And I laughed for about 20 minutes and said, I don't have a teaching certification. And she said, well, I think that you belong in schools, and I think that you should try out being a paraprofessional. So fast forward, I have had every possible job you can have in special education, except for a school psychologist. I loved being a paraprofessional so much that I went back to school and got my master's degree in mental and physical disabilities and got my teaching certificate. And from there, I had the privilege of teaching in an urban charter school and then transitioned to a suburban school district where I taught high school emotional support. So my students were 16 to 21 years old, receiving emotional support or autistic support, which was about a million years away from what my original goal had been. But I loved it, and I couldn't see myself doing anything else except that I really loved coaching my colleagues, my peers in special education, and coaching families as well of how to be the best advocate for their child. So I went back to school again and got a second master's degree in special education supervision. And I loved being in school so much, and I loved learning about new ideologies and approaches that I went back to school again, this time to get my doctoral degree, which I completed at at the tail end of the spring semester that the pandemic first took place, so in 2020. And shortly after I defended my dissertation, I was part of a small group that opened a new public charter school in Pittsburgh. And it was the first charter school been opened in Pittsburgh, and so we serve underserved populations, and I was the one that got their special education program started. And from there, I transitioned to my current role, which is the education director at Holy Family Institute.
Claudie, do you remember your experience being an expert witness for, I think it was an adult with special needs who was involved in a crime?
I was going to mention
What?
it. I was going to mention it, yes.
Oh, I thought you were asking me. I'm like, I don't think I
No, it's one of my stories. And I think that in Canada,
I see.
It was the first time ever that a neuroscientist was brought in as for the cause to witness for and to defend the person accused of a stabbing. She was a young woman with Down syndrome. And I brought the scientific evidence that she, because of her condition, did not produce enough serotonin, which is one of the ways our brain can control our actions and how we cannot be suffering from the information sent by other people. And she was exonerated thanks to the scientific evidence. So that has absolutely sealed in me that what you are saying is so important, like the information, the feedback for the teacher. The more they know, the more comfortable they are. And we see that in our field of work, where when we work with schools, and we are visiting soon a school in Australia that has picked up for their special need classes, sensory enrichment to help the kids. And the teachers just blossom. It's not just it's helping the children, obviously, because that's the purpose, but the teachers are happy, calmer, and so proud of what they are doing. And they were proud before, but now there is added information, and that's what you talk about, that giving them enough, and the coaching, and it's beautiful.
Exactly, and it's building their competency and their confidence in what they do and what their passion is, what their calling is. And I think that as school leaders, that at the end of the day, that's really what we're there to do. Sure, a lot of my time is spent looking at financials or looking at systems and operations and things of that nature. However, at the core of what my job is and has been as a special education director and an education director is to improve and bolster the capacity that my staff has to support our students. Because if I'm not doing that, it doesn't matter what our budget looks like. It doesn't matter what our operations look like, because the students are the reason that we're all there.
Mm-hmm. I typically do not ask questions. I'm just listening, but all what you're saying is so fascinating. And I'm very interested to know if the fact that you started as a journalist student, like you studied social impacts and truth, right? Objectivity. Did that help in deciding to go further in your career, and because you knew more about the impact that you could have?
That's a wonderful question. I think that it did, and I'll tell you exactly why. I think that my experience as a writer, as an investigative journalist, really conditioned me to not accept no. And I realize that's a double negative and bad English, but in terms of advocating for children, especially children with exceptionalities, it's so much easier to just accept the answer no, or we can't really do that, or we don't have the resources to do that, or no, that's not good enough. So I think that my experience as a reporter and asking the right questions and being trained to have follow-up questions and, well, what about this idea, or have you considered that? I think that has lent itself well in my career, and in a way that I had never considered. That really, that's really where that stems from. Being able to ask questions and not accepting no. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
And what was your dissertation?
My dissertation was about the phenomenon of women in educational leadership, specifically women who have risen to be a school superintendent. And what's interesting, or what is interesting about that, is the statistics involved in it. So 75%, nationally speaking, 75% of the pool of teachers in the United States are women, 25% are men. However, the figure for school superintendents is the exact reciprocal. So 25% of superintendents are women, 75% are men. And it's interesting because the largest pool of candidates to be a superintendent comes from teachers, and most superintendents are men. And so my study examined what are some sociological, political, and economic influences that determine how and why women go into school leadership.
And I know our listeners are desperate to find out. What did you find out?
I found out, you'll remember that I said at the beginning of my story that I didn't feel that I was fulfilling my need to commit to a social justice cause. What I found was, across 3 different time periods, women go into school leadership for the social justice aspect of education. They go into education to affect some level of change. And I found additionally that amongst women as educators, it doesn't matter whether you have a title or not. If you are a woman in education, if you are a woman in special education, you are a leader in education, because you are there to be an advocate for the students that you serve.
That's a powerful soundbite.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So
it was great fun. I would do it all over again in a heartbeat.
Are you saying that women don't aspire to be superintendents because they're fulfilled in their current role and that's why they're not being picked? Or are you is it something else?
Well, it's a little bit of both. So a lot of in terms of educational leadership, what I found is that a lot of leadership theories, for example, like the great man theory, we expect our leaders to fit a certain stereotype, right? Um,
Mm,
Mostly white men, very tall, very charismatic and charming, and can hold the attention of a crowd. But what I found is that women who are in education that choose to remain in the classroom feel that they're called to remain in the classroom because of the success and because of the impact that they see in their immediate population of students and families that they're
Mm.
supporting. My decision to go into school leadership, though, is because I saw that impact and I saw the influence that I could have with my families and my students. And I wanted to do more. I wanted to be able to impact and influence more families in a positive way.
I'm trying to segue into reducing restraints. I'm not finding an easy way I can. So hopefully,
Well, I'm
oh, sorry, you had an idea?
no, I was going to say, part of the idea of advocating is paying attention to student needs and trends and behavior. And at its core, if you're looking at reducing restraints, the incident rate of restraints,
Hmm.
you have to go back to the behavior trends that you see in your classroom. Because 9 times out of 10, I would say 9.9 times out of 10, if your data is good and you pay really close attention to trend lines, you can almost anticipate when the child is going to reach a peak in their behavior curve. And then you can plan more proactive strategies to stave off even needing to use a restraint.
Mhm.
Have you seen interesting data? Is there a trend that you could teach to our other special education directors that they would be able to teach their teachers?
Something that I use, and I use this in teacher trainings, and I also use this in IEP meetings, to be honest with you. I
Mm.
bring out the old school behavior curve, right? That you start at a baseline and then it's a parabola before you go return to baseline. So when reconstructing a behavior, when conducting an initial line of inquiry, it's important to ask questions. So what is it that we're seeing and that we're hearing at this point in the behavior curve? After that is established and clearly defined, rather, the question then becomes, well, what are the consequences that are reinforcing this particular behavior occurring at this point in the behavior curve? What are we doing? What are we saying? What could an outside observer see us doing? The idea of constructing behavior along that behavioral curve really takes a lot of it takes the emotion out of recalling behaviors, because that is a common occurrence in school. That, if a student has a maladaptive behavior, teachers can become very personally affected by it. So by approaching it in a very strategic and clinical approach, I have found, one, teachers are much more receptive to the conversation, and two, you're able to look at the behavior from many different vantage points to pinpoint, well, this appears to be a setting event, this appears to be an antecedent, and then you can really construct a really well structured and responsive competing behavior model.
That makes me think of a couple of experiences we've had with different school districts where um, uh, it's going to sound like we're tooting our horn, but hey, I'm going to lean into this. The
It's your show.
true, yeah, I might as well. The we were able to train the teachers to get to the point where they were able to calm de-escalate the situation in such a way that the child could verbalize what was happening for
Mm-hmm.
them at that moment, and
Mm-hmm.
in ways that they'd never been able to verbalize in the past. They'd never been able to verbalize why their behavior de-escalated. But the technique we taught them, and I don't know, Claudia, if that gives you an idea of the training you want to do at the end, but the technique we taught them not only de-escalated them, but gave them a sense of confidence and power, so they were able to communicate. And we found out some things that a teacher would never been able to find out. I'm not. I don't know. One kid was being abused at home, and that's not something that was had been part of the conversation before. And they
Mm-hmm.
were able to go back and look at trends and saw that when he was with one particular parent, things
Right.
happened in the classroom that didn't happen when he was with another parent. And another girl also was able to verbalize that she felt ashamed, and
Mm.
she used words that I mean, she felt shame she couldn't process or answer the question, and so she resorted to the kinds, and that shame. It wasn't a controlled. The meltdowns that she that had happened were not a controlled or learned behavior, but the shame sort of triggered something, and she
Mm-hmm.
spiraled. But in both cases, they were able to. Anyways, so this idea of looking for patterns and being able
Mm-hmm.
to identify triggers and anticipate, that's a
Mm-hmm.
powerful. Yeah, I think that's a magic wand right there.
Yes, I agree. I think that, and to me, maybe I'm a little bit nerdy in this, but I feel like that's the really fun part of the job. To look at the data, to examine trends, to identify things like you had brought up, like those setting events, and then implement an intervention to see what kind of change occurs in the classroom. Um, to me, that's the dream.
Yeah,
It's just fun.
you say nerding over a spreadsheet. I nerd out over spreadsheets, and I explained to the people I we're all Macs at home, but when I watched the Mac
Uh-huh.
versus PC ads 10 years ago, don't you remember them? There's a nerdy PC guy
Yes.
who's talking about his vacation and pointing at a pie chart, and then the cool Mac
Yes.
user who was talking about pictures. And it's funny because I'm a total Mac user, but I'm the PC guy.
Oh,
And if you can show me a spreadsheet, this is where I thrive.
yes.
And
Yes. I
I
feel
think
similarly.
you need, I mean, you need both. Obviously, you need us, the nerds, who will look at the data in a very cold way and patterns, and who can look
Hmm.
at things without the passion and the heat of the moment.
Hmm.
But you also need the people
Hmm.
who are personally and emotionally invested in the success of the students. Otherwise, you end up being taught by
Hmm.
robots, and you can't have that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We can't have that. AI will take over the world. We can't have that. But this is, I mentioned that I use that behavior curve explanation during IEP meetings too. And the really cool thing is to see the light bulb moment in a family's eyes, um, when they realize, like, I see that it's not just a linear progression. There's many ebbs and curves and different things that I can do and that I can say that will influence my child's behavior. And as a parent myself, it's it really is very neat in hindsight to look at that behavior curve and see how my behavior or the adult's behavior influences then the child's behavioral outcomes.
Um, what is the last program or idea that you brought into your district that was particularly successful in terms of reducing the incidence of restraints?
Yes.
Or
So
if you
my
prefer, do you have a nightmare story that we could all learn from?
I probably have both. And they're one and the same. So in my current role, I am so the institution that I am a leader in. has been a staple in Pittsburgh for 125 years. We have served the community as far as social services, residential services, community programs, and education. And so
And that's
the
the Holy
education
Family
program,
Institute, right?
Mhm. Yes, yes. So in terms of the starting point for education programs, they paralleled and they supported students that were part of a residential program. So think to um, a 1980s, early 90s juvenile detention kind of model. I joke and say it's very much like the Trunchbull phenomenon from the children's book Matilda by Roald Dahl.
Mm-hmm.
Agatha Trunchbull is the headmistress of a joyless school and often says things like, "I'm right, you're wrong, I'm big, you're little, and there's nothing you can do about it." So I that's the model that I walked into in one of the schools that I'm supporting right now. And with that mindset comes, if I as the authority figure am giving the student a directive and the student does not comply immediately, that means that they are defying an authority figure, and that could become a dangerous situation. And so we're going to go ahead and start a restraint. And the first time that I saw this this mindset play out in in real time, my eyes just blew up, my eyebrows disappeared into my hairline, and while this was all happening, I remember saying, this can't be happening in my head, and then a stronger voice came out and said, you have to stop this. This is not right. You have to stop this. And the staff did not immediately respond. And so as if I was some kind of athletic coach, which I'm not, I said, on my count, you're going to 3, 2, 1. And like the staff kind of looked at each other like, who is this person? But they did release, and the student looked at me like I was crazy too, because what I had come to find was that this was a regularly occurring pattern. And so the through line that I discussed with staff, and to be honest with you, several students and their families, was there's a better way to do this. There's a better way to support students and any kind of defiance. There's a better way of understanding it. Nobody goes to school thinking I'm going to be quote unquote bad today, or I'm going to, stick it to the man today. Nobody wakes up thinking that. People wake up in the morning, regardless of your age, regardless of your cognitive capacity, with the inherent want to feel good, to feel good. And as we mature, as we progress in our development, to feel good and to do good, to do well in the different settings and communities that
Right.
we're in.
Yes.
And so that was the crux of the conversation of, we're not going to do it this way anymore. But instead of me saying, stop doing it, I'm going to tell you, stop doing this. But also, here are some tools that you must use, because this is what the best model is. This is what the evidence-based model is. And it's been, as you probably know, it's very difficult to shift mindsets. It does not happen overnight.
That was
But
my
the
next question.
consistency and
How
yeah,
did you manage this? How long did it take? Because I imagine it was a process and it took maybe a year or two to
yes,
gradually get buy-in and more and reaching
yes.
critical mass.
Well, we're having this conversation at a very serendipitous time, because my role, I started in my current role in January. Actually, yesterday was my 1 year anniversary.
Oh,
So
happy
this has been a
anniversary.
year. Thank you. This has been a year's progression of conversations and reviewing security footage. So in the building that I'm in, we have cameras in the hallways. There's cameras in the classroom, and I use it as a coaching tool. So if there is an incident, we call it a major incident. If a child was a harm to themselves or to somebody else, and we did have to support them with a passive restraint, it's part of our new protocol to, as a team, look back at the camera footage and look what the way that we do it. We watch it from start to finish, and then we talk about some initial takeaways, and then we go back through the footage again, and have an annotated conversation, if you will, about what are some things that you see in this particular scene that we could have removed a barrier, or we could have reacted differently, and what kind of outcome would that have led to had we reacted differently. I will tell you, at first, people were extremely uncomfortable with that. Seeing
Yeah.
yourself on camera is difficult in the best of settings, but also seeing yourself on camera in an extremely vulnerable position is jarring. But the consistency and the feedback and the safe kind of setting that we established has really led to some really incredible conversations. And I think that seeing it and talking about it, and then implementing different approaches, really has been powerful in shifting the mindset.
I think we're touching on a key aspect of what makes a successful leader, and that's the idea of giving feedback. And in that very uncomfortable situation, how do you help prime your staff for having a successful meeting or review of the video?
Mm-hmm. So I usually lead off, because I always view the footage first by myself.
Right.
Because if there is a situation that a staff acted really poorly, or if there was something that would embarrass somebody's staff, I want to know that in advance before showing it to the entire staff. So everybody knows that I've already watched the footage whenever we come in. 9 times out of 10, I am also on the footage. And so it's important to come into those conversations. We have a
How do you
big
end up on
table
the
in our.
footage? I'm curious.
Oh, I support them. If there's a crisis call, I'm right there with my staff. So I also am on camera, and so
Gotcha.
and I think that was unexpected at first. That if there was a radio call, I'd click down the hallway in my heels as fast as I can, and I would be right there with them, because I go through the same training as my staff,
Gotcha.
so that I can support them, I can give them feedback.
That must be a
But so
huge
we start.
deal that you're willing to review a video that shows you as well in a vulnerable position. It's not you versus them anymore.
Yes, exactly, which has really helped with the mindset as well. And whenever I appear on the camera, usually in a suit or some kind of you know, grown-up boss-looking outfit, I usually I try and add some humor to it as well, because the whole thing can be very tense, right? Watching this all unfold in front of you. So adding some humor, and at my own expense, I am always more than happy to put in a self-depreciating joke, because it goes a long way.
Yep.
You know, it goes a long way. Like, you know, even just a comment about like the frizz factor in my hair. It's so silly, right? But it really breaks down the tenseness
Yeah.
that you know, can be evasive or pervasive rather in those conversations.
So, what advice would you give other special education leaders who are also in a position of reviewing a sensitive incident and trying to give feedback or coach one of their staff? Do you have a sound bite to share?
Yes, I'm formulating it. Give me 2 seconds. So I think that it's always important in special education to look at the bigger picture. You know, what is the overall goal here? What is it that we're trying to accomplish? And then you plan with the end in mind, right? You have that goal in your head. This is what we're trying to accomplish. And then as you plan, as you have discussions with your team, with the student, with their families, you have to plan all of those steps that theoretically lead up to that goal. You begin with the end in mind.
And you plan your steps.
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And the second piece of advice that is a close second to begin with the end in mind is to be honest. Be honest with yourself, be honest with your staff, be honest with the students and the families. It's okay to say, I don't know. Or it's okay to say, I'm not really sure. What do you think? Too often as leaders, we there's a lot of pressure to give this portrayal that we know everything, that we know all the answers, and don't worry, we're going to be the heroes and lead everybody out of any kind of tense situation. That's not realistic. And at the same time, having that kind of hero mentality, that savior mentality, it doesn't empower your team to be advocates. It doesn't empower your team to be a student's hero. And at the end of the day, that's what leadership is. It's empowering the people that you're supporting.
Thank
Does
you,
that make
Carrie.
sense?
Oh, absolutely.
I ramble a lot, so you'll have to tell me when to stop.
Well, I'm thinking this is a whole day workshop that we're delving in, and I'm going to look at the time and say, okay, let's take a step back, switch gears a little bit, and I want to give the floor to Claudie. Claudie, having heard all of this, what do you have in mind for our training session? What sensory enrichment protocol should we offer? And should it be something geared for the students? I was wondering if there's something for the teachers you're thinking of. I don't know. What do you have in mind?
Well, no, I'm not thinking about the teacher doing something, but I'm thinking about, well, all what you have said, the coaching and the anticipation. Knowing that something is going to happen, that's so brilliant and so essential. Being there and noticing, but the teacher has to keep teaching the whole classroom while somebody is starting to boil down something. It's kind of happening, but she doesn't have the time, and maybe nothing will happen. Is a little bit the hope that I have heard teachers said. So
Wishful thinking there.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're in a situation.
Here is the idea that I suggest. In the line of what Carrie has been saying, look and anticipate, notice that but then you notice, what do you do? And this is where I come in with a suggestion. In several training, I mentioned the fact that we know that kids on the spectrum, kids with learning disability, lack mental image. They have great difficulty to see something in their head, and working on helping that at the same time as diverting this energy that's boiling and that for some reason is making them feel more and more uncomfortable. So how about having them use their sense of touch and try to figure something, what they are holding, and giving them a task. So here is my suggestion for the day. First, you will need a sock. And I have funny socks too for that demonstration. You can use any sock. If we have a sports sock in the, and for the purpose of this little presentation, I'm using marbles, which is easy to explain why it's going to work that way. But I don't think that that would be a good idea with the kids. Maybe we are going to use crayons in the classroom and put a bunch of them.
Yeah, because I watched a show with a lot of gratuitous violence not too long ago, and that they made a weapon out of putting something very heavy in a sock.
Mhm.
So this is
Yes.
where my mind went.
Yes.
Get away from there. And probably they didn't see the movie. So the teacher put a few crayons in the sock and says, okay, we are, of course, addressing a kid who has some verbal abilities. Maybe he's not able to really speak, but he understands simple instructions. And we are asking him to figure out how many crayons do we have in the sock. And well, he has to put his hand in and he will see the crayons in his head. He cannot take them out. He has to keep his hand inside and try to count them. We don't need more than a minute when we are sending messages to the brain that are simplistic. It is a tactile information, and there is a simple task: enumerate, feel them all. And as he is doing that task or she is doing that task, the sense of touch is overriding everything else that was kind of starting the storm. And the hand is in the comfortable situation, and the hand is also busy doing something that means a little bit of something. So we have captured the mental activity of that kid. We have gathered this energy that was there, we give it a purpose, and we say, well, if you can tell me exactly how many, I think there is this that you will have, whatever works in the classroom. It can be a healthy treat, it can be a beautiful whatever, but working for a purpose, as we know, is boosting dopamine, right? We are working for a reward. So a short activity that is simple, but that will sort of redirect the mental activity of that kid using the sense of touch and building up the mental image by something that he recognizes by feel without, like, we don't ask him to, okay, what is that object that we do in other activities but would not work in that situation where we want to get back the kid. We want to get him to a different spot, and maybe he can sit here. I'll help you later. Can you sit here as you're doing it? For example, that is also relocating and changing the kind of energy that was going on. So that's my suggestion, my multisensory suggestion to help redirect when you feel something is going on that may not end up in a positive way.
Carrie, as somebody who's in the trenches, how do you see yourself doing that? Do you have a kid? Do you have a
I,
student in mind?
I do. One of our fifth grade students, and something that made me think of this student in particular was what you had said just now about how students with autism or a specific learning disability often have a difficult time visualizing themselves in a plane of space. And so I think
Mhm.
that this exercise not only is a good strategy to build that skill level up, but I also think that it could be really grounding as well. That it's almost, you can turn it into like the old, what are five things you can see, four things you can hear,
Yeah,
three
one,
things you
two,
can
three, four,
smell,
five.
like
Yeah.
that kind of exercise. Yes,
Yeah.
that kind of exercise. So I think that you could use that strategy and that activity um, in a myriad of different ways. So I think that that's really interesting. And I have one student in mind that I can picture in my head doing this with.
I'll uh,
Great.
I'll send you the page from our workbook where I think I don't where this protocol is being described, and maybe you can use it as a handout or as a um, something to share. Thank you very much for your
Oh, that'd be
time
wonderful.
during the podcast, Carrie. It was immensely valuable and so interesting. So the nerd in me got really excited about the data.
Yes,
Thank you,
you're
Claudie.
very welcome. I'm
Sorry, I interrupted you.
Sorry. No, that's okay. I was going to say you're very welcome. I'm very flattered and very very thrilled to have been a part of this.